Okay guys, so the Curado DC has arrived. And I am going to do the unboxing for you just like about this time last year. I did the unboxing for the Curado K. I can't remember which reel had more hype around it, the DC or the K. But yeah, let's see what this thing looks like. Here's all the paperwork, and here is the Curado DC 150. Now it looks like a JDM box to me because it's black with some silver lettering. But yeah, let's get to it. Now originally I ordered the XG model, but those are not scheduled to come out until October. Now I saw these 6.2 ratios on Tackle Warehouse, and I put my order in the other day, and here it is. I've seen videos on this reel and pictures and whatnot, but I want to see what it looks like in person. So here's the schematics and some instructions about the spool control or cast control. Of course, you get Shimano oil. Okay, wow. I can already tell now just by feeling it, the paint job is different than the Curado K. Okay, let's look at this thing here. Put all this to the side. Now as you can see, I thought the color was going to be very similar to the Curado K, but it's not. It's a dark silver. And it's not quite matte, but it's not quite shiny. It's kind of in between. That's kind of cool. Very smooth. As expected, it's got the micro module gears. The drag was tightened down, but there we go. Now I can feel that Curado smoothness. I'm gonna let you guys take a good look at this thing. Give you guys a nice 360-degree look at it. Here's that external dial for the DC controls. Okay, they kind of painted the thumb bar along with the body. There's that green spool, and it's got this hole in the middle of it. Maybe the instructions will tell us what that hole is for, but yeah, there we go. I'm going to study this thing, look at the instructions, see what Shimano has to say about it in the paperwork, and then I will get back to you guys. Okay guys, so I took a few minutes and I studied this reel, read the instructions, and let's talk about why this reel is such a big deal and why this reel was so hyped and there was so much anticipation for the release of this reel. And the simple answer is that this was supposedly the first affordable DC reel for the masses. Now if you know anything about JDM reels and the JDM market, and if you paid attention to the first part of this video, you'll know that statement should be changed to the first affordable DC reel for the American masses. Because there were a couple of Scorpion DCs and the Exense DC for a time when the exchange rate was really favorable for us. They were very affordable to Americans. But of course, those are JDM reels and you won't get a warranty. Okay, so this reel, despite having the title of being affordable, cost $250. So to Americans, that is a lot of money to be paying for any fishing reel. So why would you buy this reel? What makes this $80 more than the standard Curado K? And to illustrate that point, of course I'm going to bring out the standard Curado K. Let you guys take a good look at these reels side by side. And let's go over some differences. They're not that many, but let me try to point them out. Now the big obvious difference is color scheme. It's got a more high-end paint job. You know, it's got a silver, luxurious look to it. Especially when the light hits it, you can tell. And it feels a little different than the texture of the Curado K's paint job. Feels like it's got a glossier coating, as I mentioned before. And of course, the color of the components, as you can see, the DC is sporting the green knobs, I'm sorry, not knobs, but drag star and handles, while the K sports that silver gunmetal. Now, I'm not too sure about the color green. I think it would look better being a shiny black, but oh well, there's always the aftermarket. And as far as other little details, the thumb bar seems to be a little bit more high-end. They've actually painted it, and it's two-tone. As you can see, these sides here are actually black, while the thumb bar on the K does not look to be painted at all. Just got a coating on it. Okay, and another difference is the line capacity. The K is a 200 line capacity in Shimano speak, while because of the DC unit, the Curado DC only has a 150 line capacity. And we'll go over more details in that in a moment. And of course, the biggest difference is the braking system. The Curado DC sports the Shimano's digital control. That's what DC stands for. While the Curado K has the SVS Infinity, the latest generation. If I can open this up and show you guys, there we go. Okay, so because Shimano's DC unit and its external adjustability, they decided to place it up here so it actually gives the DC a different look when you look at it from the side. The side plates or the palming plates are a little different. They look to be the same height though. And of course, when you look at it from the top, the DC's front area is a lot wider, as you can tell, because of the placement of the adjustment dial. And you can feel it. It doesn't feel uncomfortable, but you can definitely feel that that is wider in the front versus the Curado K, which is tapered at the front. Still very comfortable though. So what has stayed the same? Now, of course, the DC has the micro module gears. That's the same. It's got X-ship. It's got the same bearing count, 6 ball bearings and 1 roller bearing for a total of 7 bearings. And the handle length looks to be the same at 90 millimeters. And luckily, as you can see, they included the same knobs, which in my opinion are the most comfortable knobs on the market, whether it be factory or aftermarket. They're just super soft. They have that Shimano ergonomic contouring that I've explained several times before. The contour goes only one way on both sides, and it goes this way. So when you're grasping the knob, your thumb is going this way naturally, and then on the other side, your finger is going this way naturally. So that's why Shimano's knobs are so comfortable versus others. And also the material, the Septon is so soft and grippy, but yet firm. So yeah, those are the differences between the two. And let's see if there's any differences in weight. Okay guys, so I popped the scale out. Now, the one drawback of DC reels, or one of the drawbacks of DC reels, is that because of the DC braking, they are generally heavier than their non-DC counterparts. But Shimano says this is only 0.2 of a gram heavier than the Curado K. Now in hand, I don't feel a difference. Picking one up versus the other, I don't see a difference at all. But let's see what the scale says. According to Shimano, the Curado K is supposed to weigh 7.6 ounces. So the scale says 7.71. Let's weigh that again just to make sure. Yep, 7.71. It's a little bit heavier than what Shimano says. So according to Shimano and Tackle Warehouse's website, this is only supposed to weigh 7.8 ounces. Okay, so it weighs right at 7.8 ounces. So it only gained 0.1 of an ounce versus the Curado K. And that's pretty significant because with the Metanium, the DC model versus the regular Metanium, there was almost 1 ounce gained with the DC model. It was 1 ounce heavier than the non-DC. So that's pretty good from Shimano to not really add any kind of weight to the DC. So it shouldn't hinder your ability to, you know, cast this thing as hard as you can cast a Curado K. Okay, so let's go over another drawback of DC reels, and that's spool weight. So I'm going to pull these spools out. Now to access the spool in the Curado DC, you have to flip this dial all the way to the open mode. I don't know if you can see there. And then according to the instructions, you just flip this down. There we go. And there's the DC unit. Now this is Shimano's IDC4, which means there's 4 settings. And strangely enough, this IDC4 unit was previously in the some high-end Shimanos like the first Metanium DC and the Conquest 50 DC, and some other expensive Shimano models. As you can see, there's some grease right there. So let's pull this spool out. Now let's talk about this DC unit real quick. Now a lot of people have asked and expressed concerns over what will happen to a DC unit once it gets wet. Can you dunk this reel? Now, way back in 2003 when the first Shimano DC reel came out, the Conquest DC, Tackle Tour actually tested that. I read in the article that they dunked the reel, submerged it underwater for several seconds, and when they pulled it back out, the DC unit was not functioning when it was wet. But once it dried up, it started functioning as normal. So that was the very first DC unit. According to Shimano, they have really sealed these newer DC units, as you can see right here. This feels like a kind of like a rubberish plastic housing. And yeah, I don't foresee a problem. Even if this thing somehow got wet, apparently once it dries up, it'll start working again. But you shouldn't be dunking your reels anyway. Okay, so let's look at these spools. Now they are the same dimension as far as width. They're both 25 millimeters wide. And as far as diameter, they're both 34 millimeters. As you can see, neither of them have a bearing. But the DC has the DC unit. And that's another reason why this has a shallower spool, or a smaller capacity spool. As you can see there, it's much noticeably shallower than the Curado K. Okay, so let's weigh this Curado K spool, and it weighs right in at just about 16 grams even, which is about normal for a reel of its class. Now, there was a subscriber of mine in Malaysia who got his DC reel way early, a few weeks ago, and he weighed the spool for me and he told me it was 20 grams. So let's see what the scale says. Okay, wow, 20.7 grams. So almost 21 grams. Now that is heavy. And of course that is heavy due to the electromagnet portion of the DC reel attached to the spool. Now, what I'm going to do when I do the casting test between these two is I'm going to weigh these spools filled with line to see if the shallower line capacity will equal everything out. There's one thing you can obviously see is that the spool shaft on the DC reel is much longer on this side than the Curado K, where they look to be the same on the other side. So once again, that is the weights and measurements of the Curado DC versus the Curado K. And a very disappointing 20.7 gram spool for the Curado K. But I can't say that I'm really surprised, because this is the entry-level Curado, I should say entry-level DC reel. So they're not going to give it too light of a spool. You don't want it outcasting some of your more expensive reels. Okay, so let's talk about DC braking and what this is all about. Okay guys, so I've explained DC braking in several videos before, but for anyone who's new to the channel and viewing this for the first time because you're interested in this reel, DC braking of course stands for digital control, and you saw that there was a digital circuit housed in the side plate, and what it does, it constantly monitors the spool every thousandth of a second, and it only applies the electromagnetic brakes once it senses an overrun. So because of this advanced technology, despite the heavy spool, DC reels are some of the longest casting reels available, and having owned several, the consistency of the long casting and the ease at which you can get those long casts is better than pretty much almost all reels on the market. But you also get excellent spool control, meaning you'll rarely see any overruns or coils during the middle of the cast. So some reels, who are heavy on the brakes with, controlled spools, they do that at the expense of distance. Now with DC, you get distance and control all in one cast. So that is why there is an $80 difference between this and the Curado K, because of this advanced braking. So let's go over what Shimano says this DC, the brake settings I should say. So the one thing that they illustrate is that they want you to set this spool tension. As you can hear there, it's wobbling. As you can see, it's wobbling. They want you to set the spool tension on this reel to just eliminate that wobble. Let the DC brakes take care of everything. Now, of course, any reel can be set up this way as far as the cast control / spool tension, but it's especially important for DC reels, apparently. Now, with my experience, you can actually adjust that in certain situations and get more distance. So now, there, I've just eliminated the wobble. Okay, so once you've set the spool control or the cast control cap to the correct setting, there's 4 different settings on this external dial. As you can see, the paint on this dial is very, very faint and the numbers are very small, and that's something Shimano in the future should address, because my old eyes can barely see that that's a 1. I don't know if you can see that. And in certain low light conditions, you're not going to be able to really see that. Okay, so according to Shimano, the first number 1 is going to give you the minimum amount of braking for maximum distance in calm conditions. And I'm probably going to throw in this caveat: you're probably going to be wanting to throw heavier weights that are pretty aerodynamic, like maybe spoons or top waters. And then number 2 is for braid and mono in any conditions. So number 2 is for braid and mono. Number 3 is for fluorocarbon in any condition. And then number 4 is maximum braking for extreme windy conditions, beginners, and skipping technique. So basically, number 4 is maximum braking. Of course, the lower the number, the less braking you're going to get. So maximum braking, the least, the next to the amount of maximum braking on number 3, the second to the least amount of braking for number 2, and then number 1 for the least amount of braking possible. So it's very simple. Now, of course, Shimano's got these in other DC reels, but instead of numbers, they give you line modes. So that's something that's different. So a lot of DC reels are very intimidating, I should say. They have a lot of settings, different line modes, and then you got your different settings within the line mode, so they can be very intimidating. But this reel is for, I guess, the beginner DC user. So it's very straightforward: 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay guys, so a couple more things before we get to the ending portion of this video. Now, the first thing I want to say is that the external dial on the Curado DC, it's got a very positive feel to it, meaning it takes a little bit of effort to go from one setting to the other, but I think that's on purpose. And the clicks are very positive, and there's no kind of movement in between line settings that I can feel. And also, Shimano, they always do something for a reason. That's one thing I've learned about Shimano: when they do something, they do it for a reason. And the reason they put this dial up in the top towards the front is that when you're out fishing and you got, of course, the DC mounted on a rod, you need to make a quick adjustment. You can just take your thumb and go back and forth just with your thumb, just like that, and then fire out a cast as needed. So it looks kind of awkward, you know, it makes it a little bit wider at certain angles, but of course this is function over form. And also, the DC has the S3D spool. If you don't know what that is uniform thinness. So the machining process makes the walls of the spool the same thinness everywhere. So that's supposed to give you better balance and I guess less vibration and longer cast, in theory. Now, there's a hole here, and I don't know what that hole is for. There's nothing in the manual about this hole and what it's for. You can't really use it as a line tie. I'm thinking it probably has something to do with the optical sensor for the DC unit, but when peeking up under there, I didn't really see anything. So if anyone knows what that hole is for, let us know in the comments, because I'm really curious as to why Shimano put that hole there. Okay guys, so what is next for the Curado DC? Now, if you've been a follower of my channel, you know what's coming next. I'm going to see if this reel lives up to the hype. If you've seen a lot of videos on YouTube that were released before iCast, there were people bombing, weights and heavy lures, and even a guy casting into a brick wall without backlashing. There's some smoke and mirrors there, but we're going to see if this thing lives up to the hype. And we're going to put it to the test against several reels. Now, the first reel it's got to beat, of course, is its older brother, the Curado K. So, in the next portion of this series, this is part 1, and part 2 is I'm going to take these out on the water and cast different lures of different weights and shapes and sizes to see if we can see any kind of difference in casting distance on the water. And then in part 2, I'm going to take them out to the casting field and with some casting plugs to see who can actually cast the longest with a casting plug. Now, I don't predict it's going to be an easy victory for the DC. It may not even win at all, because when set up right, when dialed in correctly, this Curado K is a monster caster. So, we'll have to see what happens. Curado K versus Curado DC in the next video. Okay, so once it's done battling the Curado K, whether it wins or loses, it's going to go straight into battle against its JDM cousins, the Scorpion DC, the Metanium DC, and the super expensive high dollar Antares DC. And they are all going to go through the standardized testing so we can see just who the elite reels are out there on the market. So be on the lookout for that. Those should be coming in the next few weeks. And thanks a lot, guys.